Harrison Sterling thought he had calculated every variable. He was the brilliant CEO, the man of the hour, and he was about to trade his quiet, seemingly penniless wife for a woman whose father owned half the city. He looked at Isla, sitting across from him with her frayed cardigan and silent demeanor, and felt nothing but relief that he was finally cutting the dead weight. He handed her the divorce papers with a smirk, thinking the game was over. He didn't know that the woman signing her name wasn't losing a husband. She was releasing a king from his mercy. Harrison was about to learn that in the game of power, you never checkmate a queen you didn't know was playing. The crystal chandelier above the dining table in the Sterling estate didn't just provide light, it cast a judgment. Every prism refracted the cold, calculated ambition of the man sitting at the head of the table. Harrison Sterling, at 34, was the picture of modern success. His architectural firm, Sterling Horizons, had just secured the contract for the new city skyline project. He wore suits that cost more than most people's cars, and drank scotch that was aged longer than his marriage. Across from him sat Isla. To the outside world, and increasingly to Harrison, Isla was a ghost in her own home. She wore a simple beige dress that she had owned for years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical, unglamorous bun. She was eating her soup with the quiet, methodical grace that used to charm Harrison when they were struggling university students. Back then, her silence felt like peace. Now, 5 years later, her silence felt like an anchor, dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. Harrison checked his watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe. He was impatient. "Is the soup to your liking?" Isla asked softly, her voice barely rising above the clink of silverware. Harrison sighed, dropping his spoon with a deliberate clatter. "It's fine, Isla. It's always fine. That's the problem." Isla paused, her hand hovering over her glass of water. "I don't understand." "Of course you don't," Harrison snapped, standing up and walking to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the manicured gardens. "You live in this bubble, Isla. You spend your days gardening, reading, doing whatever it is you do. Meanwhile, I am out there, fighting wolves. I am building an empire." He turned to face her, his eyes cold. "I need a partner, a power player, someone who can walk into a gala and command the room, not someone who hides in the corner, holding a clutch like a shield." Isla gently placed her napkin on the table. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. "I have supported you, Harrison. I managed the home. I cared for your mother when she was sick. I budgeted our lives when we had nothing." "That was then," Harrison's voice boomed. "We aren't poor anymore, Isla. But you still act like the orphan girl I picked up at the library. You haven't grown. You haven't evolved." The air in the room grew heavy. Harrison reached into his inner jacket pocket. This was the moment. He had rehearsed it with Bianca earlier that afternoon. "Be firm," Bianca had told him, running a manicured nail down his lapel. "Don't let her guilt you. You deserve the best." He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface and stopped inches from Isla's hand. "What is this?" she asked, though her eyes didn't move to the envelope. She kept them fixed on him. "Freedom," Harrison stated, buttoning his jacket. "For both of us. Those are divorce papers, Isla. I've had my lawyers draw them up. It's a generous settlement. You get the apartment in the suburbs and a monthly stipend for 2 years. It's more than enough for someone with your simple needs." Isla looked at the envelope. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply reached out and touched the paper with a fingertip. "Is there someone else?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a verification. Harrison scoffed. Does it matter? But if you must know, yes. Someone who understands my world. Someone who fits the future I'm building. As if on cue, the heavy oak doors of the dining room opened. The sound of high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor echoed through the room. I hope I'm not interrupting the negotiation, a voice purred. Isla turned her head slowly. Walking in was Bianca Dupont. She was everything Isla was not, vibrant, loud, and draped in wealth. She wore a red designer dress that screamed for attention, and diamonds glittered at her throat. Her father was the steel tycoon essential for Harrison's new skyscraper project. This wasn't just an affair. It was a merger. Bianca, Harrison said, his demeanor instantly softening. I told you I'd handle this. I know, darling, Bianca said, walking past Isla and resting a hand possessively on Harrison's shoulder. She looked down at Isla with a sneer disguised as pity. But I wanted to make sure she understood the reality of the situation. We don't want this dragging on, do we? The press release for our engagement is already drafted. Isla looked from Harrison to Bianca. A strange emotion flickered in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It looked almost like disappointment. You're engaging in a merger, Harrison, Isla said quietly. Not a marriage. I'm engaging in a future, Harrison retorted. Sign the papers, Isla. Don't make this ugly. You can't afford a legal battle. My lawyers will bury you. Isla stood up. For a moment, she seemed taller. She smoothed the front of her beige dress. You are right, Isla said. I don't want a battle. She picked up a pen from the table, a cheap ballpoint she had brought with her, contrasting sharply with the expensive fountain pens Harrison used. She flipped to the back page. Isla, read the terms first, Harrison said, slightly thrown by her speed. You need to know what you're waiving. I don't want your money, Harrison, she said, her voice steady. I don't want the suburban apartment. I don't want the stipend. Don't be a martyr, Bianca laughed, pouring herself a glass of wine from Harrison's decanter. Take the cash, honey. It's the only thing of value you'll leave with. Isla signed her name. Isla V. The signature was elegant, sweeping, and practiced. She closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. I leave with exactly what I came with, Isla said. My dignity. And my name. Harrison snatched the papers, checking the signature. He felt a wave of triumph. It was done. He was free. He looked at Isla, expecting her to break down now, to beg for a second chance. You have 1 hour to pack, Harrison said coldly. Bianca is moving in tonight. Isla nodded. 1 hour is plenty. She turned and walked out of the dining room. Harrison watched her go, feeling a strange prickle on the back of his neck. It was too easy. Why hadn't she fought? Why didn't she ask for alimony? She's in shock, Bianca said, reading his mind. She clinked her glass against his. To us, Harrison, and to the end of dead weight. Harrison forced a smile, raising his empty hand. To us? But as he looked at the closed door, he couldn't shake the feeling that the temperature in the room had dropped the moment Isla left. The master bedroom was a chaotic display of luxury, but Isla's side of the closet was sparse. She pulled out a single, battered leather suitcase from beneath the bed. It was an old vintage piece, scuffed and worn, with brass latches that had dulled over time. She didn't pack the jewelry Harrison had bought her for appearances, the diamond studs, the pearl necklace. She left them on the velvet vanity tray. She didn't pack the silk gowns he insisted she wear to company dinners, the ones that always felt too tight and too revealing. She packed 3 changes of clothes. She packed a small, leather-bound journal. And finally, she reached into the back of her sock drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, lay a heavy, ornate signet ring and a passport that was a different color than the standard blue American one Harrison had. The crest on the passport was gold and intricate, depicting a dual-headed eagle holding a sword and an olive branch. She ran her thumb over the crest, taking a deep breath. She had promised herself she wouldn't open this box unless it was an emergency. She had wanted to live a normal life. She had wanted to be loved for Isla, not for the heavy, ancient title that came attached to her bloodline. For 5 years, she had played the role of the orphan. She had let Harrison believe she had no family, no connections, no past. It was the only way to know if his love was real. And now she had her answer. She tucked the passport and the ring into the inner pocket of her coat. She snapped the suitcase shut. Downstairs, the sound of laughter drifted up. Bianca was already rearranging the furniture. Isla walked down the grand staircase. Harrison was waiting in the foyer, his arms crossed. He checked his watch again. 45 minutes, he noted. Efficient to the last. I won't bother you again, Harrison, Isla said, gripping the handle of her suitcase. Bianca stepped out from the living room, holding a glass of champagne. She looked at Isla's battered suitcase and laughed. My God, Harrison, did she find that bag in a dumpster? It looks like it's from the 1920s. Isla paused at the door. She looked at Bianca, her expression unreadable. It belonged to my grandmother. She traveled across Europe with it during the war. It has held more courage than you will ever possess. Bianca's smile faltered for a second, her eyes narrowing. Get out, and don't think about coming back when you run out of money for a motel. Isla opened the heavy front door. The rain had started to fall, a cold, grey drizzle that matched the mood of the evening. Goodbye, Harrison, Isla said softly. I hope the empire you build is warm enough to keep you company when the lights go out. She stepped into the rain. The door slammed shut behind her, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in her chest. Isla walked down the long, paved driveway. She didn't call an Uber. She didn't call a taxi. She walked until she was outside the iron gates of the Sterling estate. A black sedan was parked just down the street, idling in the shadows of a large oak tree. It wasn't a flashy sports car like Harrison's. It was a Bentley, sleek, armored, and understated. As Isla approached, the rear door opened. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out, holding a large umbrella. He was older, with silver hair and a posture that suggested military training. He hurried to Isla, shielding her from the rain. Your Highness, the man said, his voice thick with emotion. He bowed his head low, a gesture of profound respect that no one in this city had ever shown her. We have been waiting for your call. Isla handed him her suitcase. Hello, Arthur. I'm sorry to wake you. Nonsense, ma'am, Arthur said, taking the bag as if it were made of glass. The family has been anxious. Is it done? Isla looked back at the mansion on the hill, where the lights were blazing, and she could see the silhouette of Harrison and Bianca in the window. Yes, Arthur, she said, her voice hardening, shedding the meekness of the housewife like a wet coat. It is done. The masquerade is over. Where to, Your Highness? The consulate? Or straight to the airfield? Isla slid into the leather-back seat of the car. She pulled the wooden box from her pocket and slipped the heavy signet ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The airfield, she commanded. My brother is hosting the Grand Diplomatic Summit in 2 weeks. I believe it is time I returned home. And Arthur? Yes, ma'am. Make sure my name is on the guest list for the summit, and send an invitation to Sterling Horizons. Arthur met her eyes in the rearview mirror and smiled, a sharp, knowing smile. An invitation, Your Highness? For Mr. Sterling? Yes, Isla said, staring out at the rain-streaked window. He wants to be a player in the world of power. I think I should show him what real power looks like. The Bentley pulled away silently, disappearing into the night, leaving the suburban ambitions of Harrison Sterling far behind. 3 weeks had passed since the divorce. For Harrison, they had been the best 3 weeks of his life. With Isla gone, the dead weight was lifted. Bianca had moved in immediately, bringing with her a whirlwind of social connections and high society parties. The house was no longer quiet. It was filled with the clinking of glasses, the laughter of the city's elite, and the constant praise of Harrison's genius. His partnership with Bianca's father, Tobias DuPont, was finalized. The financing for the Sterling Tower was secured. Harrison was on the cover of City Business magazine, his arm around Bianca, the headline reading, "The Power Couple of the Future." He hadn't thought about Isla once, or so he told himself. Occasionally, when he opened the fridge and saw empty shelves where his prepared meals used to be, or when he couldn't find a specific file that Isla used to organize, he felt a flash of irritation. But he pushed it down. He was winning. One Tuesday morning, Harrison arrived at his office to find his assistant, Jessica, buzzing with excitement. "Mr. Sterling, you won't believe what just arrived via courier," Jessica squealed, holding a thick, velvet-textured envelope. It was sealed with red wax. Harrison frowned. "Courier? From who?" "It's from the Royal Consulate of Ethelgard," Jessica said, her eyes wide. "The diplomatic summit. It's the most exclusive event of the decade. The King of Ethelgard is visiting the States for the first time in 20 years to announce global infrastructure partnerships." Harrison froze. Ethelgard. It was a small but immensely wealthy European nation, known for its banking privacy, its technological advancements, and its centuries-old monarchy. A contract with the Ethelgardian crown would be worth billions. It would make the Sterling Tower look like a Lego set. "Give me that," Harrison said, snatching the envelope. He broke the seal. Inside was a gold-leafed invitation. "To Mr. Harrison Sterling and guest, you are cordially invited to the Grand Diplomatic Ball, requesting the honor of your presence to celebrate the royal visit. Venue, the Grand Pierre Hotel, ballroom. Dress code, white tie." "How did we get this?" Harrison muttered, stunned. "People kill for these invites. Senators are trying to get in." "It must be the DuPont connection," Bianca said, walking into his office, a latte in hand. She saw the invite and shrieked, "Oh my God, Harrison! The Ethelgard ball! Do you know who will be there? The royals! If we impress them. My dad says they are looking for architects for their new capital district." Harrison grinned, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "This is it, Bianca. This is the big leagues. Isla would have fainted just reading the invitation. But you were made for this." Bianca kissed his cheek. "We are going to own that room, Harrison. I'll buy a new dress. Something that says, 'Future Queen of Industry.'" Harrison leaned back in his chair. He felt invincible. He had shed his past, and now the universe was rewarding him. He had no idea that the invitation wasn't a reward. It was a summons. The night of the Grand Diplomatic Ball arrived with a humidity that made the air feel heavy, though inside the limousine, the climate control kept the atmosphere crisp and cold. Harrison adjusted his bow tie for the 10th time in the reflection of the darkened window. He was wearing a tuxedo, custom-made in Milan, the fabric so black it seemed to absorb the light. Beside him, Bianca was a vision of aggressive wealth. She wore a gown of gold sequins that shimmered with every breath, cut low in the front and back, designed to demand attention. "Stop fidgeting, Harrison," Bianca snapped, applying a final layer of crimson lipstick. "You look fine, better than fine. You look like a man who is about to own the city." "It's not just the city, Bianca," Harrison replied, his voice tight. "This is international. If I can get 5 minutes with the Ethel Guardian delegation, if I can show them the blueprints for the Sterling Tower, we go global. We become untouchable." He looked out the window as the limo slowed to a crawl. They were approaching the Grand Pierre Hotel, but the scene outside was unlike anything Harrison had ever witnessed. It wasn't just paparazzi. It was a military operation. Black SUVs with diplomatic flags flanked the entrance. Men with earpieces and assault rifles stood on the rooftops. The sidewalks were barricaded, holding back throngs of onlookers waving small flags. A flag Harrison didn't recognize, split into quadrants of blue and silver, with a dual-headed eagle in the center. "Who knew a little European country had so many fans?" Bianca scoffed, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. "It's probably staged. They pay people to cheer to make the king look important." Harrison didn't answer. A knot of unease was tightening in his stomach. This level of security, this level of reverence, it felt ancient. It felt heavy. The limo stopped. A doorman in a white uniform opened the door. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning as Harrison stepped out, extending a hand to Bianca. She soaked it up, waving to the cameras, posing on the red carpet. But Harrison noticed something unsettling. The photographers weren't shouting his name. They were barely looking at him. They were looking past him, waiting for someone else. They moved through the security checkpoint, which was rigorous. Metal detectors, ID checks, and a cross-reference with a digital guest list. When the scanner beeped green on Harrison's invitation, the guard looked at him with a strange expression, a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Mr. Sterling," the guard said, his accent thick. "You are expected. Please, proceed to the grand ballroom. Do not deviate from the marked areas." "Expected?" Harrison whispered to Bianca as they walked down the marble corridor. "That sounds promising. They must know who I am." "Of course they do," Bianca whispered back, linking her arm through his. "You're the architect of the future. These royals are probably living in drafty castles. They need you to modernize them." They entered the ballroom, and the breath was knocked out of Harrison's lungs. The room was a cavern of gold and crystal. The ceiling was 3 stories high, painted with frescoes of cherubs and gods. But it was the people that intimidated him. This wasn't the local country club crowd. This was old money. There were ambassadors in sashes, generals with chests full of medals, and women wearing jewelry that looked like it belonged in a museum. Harrison felt suddenly small. His expensive tuxedo felt like a costume. "Let's get a drink," Bianca said, undeterred. She pulled him toward the bar, her gold dress rustling loudly in the sophisticated hush of the room. As they waited for their champagne, Harrison scanned the room. He spotted Carter Bennett, a rival architect whom Harrison had beaten for the City Museum contract years ago. Carter was standing near a pillar, talking to a severe-looking woman in a navy suit. Harrison, needing to assert dominance to calm his nerves, walked over, dragging Bianca with him. "Carter," Harrison said, his voice booming, slightly too loud. "Surprised to see you here. I didn't know you did international work." Carter turned. He looked older, tired. But when he saw Harrison, a slow, confusing smile spread across his face. "Harrison. And the new Mrs. Sterling, I presume?" "Fiancé," Bianca corrected sharply. "Right," Carter said. "I'm actually here as a consultant for the Preservation Society, but I wouldn't miss tonight for the world. The rumors are, well, they're historic." "Rumors?" Harrison asked, narrowing his eyes. "About the infrastructure deal?" Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "Always business with you, Harrison?" "No. The rumor is about the royal family. The king has brought his sister, the lost princess. She's been living in exile, or hiding, rather, for years. Tonight is her official return to the court. A princess? Bianca rolled her eyes. Sounds like a fairy tale for children. I'm here to talk to the king about real estate. Carter looked at Bianca, then back at Harrison. The look in his eyes was almost pitying. Well, good luck with that. I suggest you stand near the front. You'll want a good view. Carter walked away, leaving Harrison with a bad taste in his mouth. Ignore him, Bianca said, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. He's jealous. Now look, there's the distinct crest of Ethelgard on that podium. Let's go stand there. When the king comes out, I'll introduce myself. They pushed their way to the front of the velvet rope line, ignoring the annoyed glares of a French diplomat and his wife. Harrison stood tall, checking his cufflinks. He was ready. He was Harrison Sterling. He had discarded his past to be here. He was about to seize his future. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, so absolute that the sound of a dropped pin would have echoed like a gunshot. Two massive trumpeters appeared on the balcony above, raising long, silver horns. The sound was deafening, a regal fanfare that vibrated in Harrison's chest. A voice, deep and resonant, boomed over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, all rise for His Majesty, King Edward IV of Ethelgard, and Her Royal Highness, Princess Isolde. Harrison straightened his back. This was it. The double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. First came the king. Edward was a tall man, perhaps 40, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes of piercing grey. He wore a military dress uniform, a red sash across his chest, and a golden sabre at his hip. He radiated authority. The crowd bowed their heads as he began to descend the stairs. Harrison watched, mesmerized. "That's him," he whispered. "That's the money." But the king stopped on the first landing. He turned back toward the open doors and extended his hand. The crowd held its breath. A woman stepped out of the shadows. Harrison blinked. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. His brain tried to process the visual information, but it rejected it. It was impossible. It was a hallucination brought on by stress and scotch. The woman was wearing a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that hugged her frame before cascading down into a train that shimmered like the night sky. On her head sat a tiara, not a simple band, but a towering construct of diamonds and sapphires that caught the light and threw it back with blinding intensity. Around her neck was a necklace of stones, so large they looked fake, except for the way they held the light with a cold, heavy fire. But it wasn't the jewelry. It was the face. The dark hair was no longer in a messy bun. It was styled in glossy, intricate waves. The face was made up, the cheekbones highlighted, the lips painted a soft rose. But those eyes. Harrison knew those eyes. He had looked into them every morning for 5 years. He had looked into them 3 weeks ago, when he handed her divorce papers. Isla. The word escaped his lips as a strangled gasp. It was too quiet for anyone else to hear, lost in the collective intake of breath from the room. Bianca was squinting. "Who is that? She looks familiar." The woman, Princess Isolde, took the king's hand. She didn't look down at her feet. She looked straight out into the crowd. Her posture was perfect, regal, terrifying. She descended the stairs with a grace that Isla, the clumsy housewife who dropped coffee mugs, had never possessed. Or perhaps she had always possessed it, and she had simply been hiding it. "It can't be," Harrison muttered, his hands beginning to shake. "It can't be her. She's a nobody. She's an orphan." "Harrison," Bianca hissed, her nails digging into his arm. "Harrison, look at her. Look at her face. That's your ex-wife." "No," Harrison said, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Isla is poor. She's in a motel somewhere. This is a look-alike, a cousin. It's a coincidence." But as the royals reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted. The king and the princess began to walk through the line of guests. They were coming straight toward the VIP section, where Harrison and Bianca had pushed their way to the front. As she got closer, the reality became undeniable. The curve of her jaw, the small scar on her left eyebrow, a scar Isla told him she got falling off a bike as a kid. Isla. His Isla was a princess. The room spun. Memories flashed through Harrison's mind. Isla refusing to talk about her family. Isla speaking fluent French to a waiter once, then claiming she learned it in high school. Isla's impeccable table manners that he had always taken for granted. Isla telling him, "I leave with exactly what I came with." He thought she meant her clothes. She meant her crown. The king and princess stopped just a few feet away, greeting the French ambassador. Harrison could hear her voice. It was Isla's voice, but different. It was polished, commanding, stripped of the softness she used to use with him. "We are delighted you could join us, Ambassador," she said in flawless French, then switched to English without a pause. "The treaty regarding the maritime borders is of great interest to my brother." Harrison felt like he was going to vomit. He had called this woman uneducated. He had told her she held him back. He had told her she didn't understand his world. And she was standing there, discussing international maritime law while wearing a tiara worth more than his entire architectural firm. Bianca was frozen, her mouth slightly open. The realization was hitting her too, but unlike Harrison's fear, hers was a mix of horror and fury. She had won the man, but she had lost the game. Then it happened. Princess Isolde turned. Her eyes swept over the crowd and landed precisely on Harrison. There was no shock in her face, no sadness. There was only a cool, detached recognition. It was the look a human gives to a bug they are deciding whether or not to step on. She leaned over and whispered something to the king. King Edward looked up, his grey eyes locking onto Harrison with the intensity of a laser sight. His expression darkened. The brotherly protection in his stance was palpable. He nodded to his sister. The royal procession changed course. They weren't moving away. They were coming straight for Harrison. "Oh my God," Bianca whispered. "They're coming here. Harrison, say something. Fix this." Harrison couldn't speak. His throat was closed. Isla stopped 3 feet in front of him. The security guards took a step closer, their hands hovering near their jackets, creating a wall of tension. "Mr. Sterling," Isla said. The sound of his name on her lips, spoken with such icy formality, cut him deeper than any scream could have. "Isla." Harrison croaked. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "I don't understand." "Her Royal Highness, Princess Isolde of Ethelgard," the king corrected, his voice like grinding stones. "You will address her by her proper title, or you will be removed." Harrison's knees buckled slightly. "Your Highness." Isla smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It reached her eyes, but it didn't make them warm. It made them shine with victory. "I see you received the invitation," Isla said smoothly. "I insisted on it. I wanted to make sure you saw the scope of the world you were so eager to join." "Isla, please," Harrison stammered, his brain scrambling to find a foothold. "Why? Why didn't you tell me? We were married for 5 years." "I wanted to be loved for myself, Harrison," she said simply. "Not for my title, not for my treasury, and for a while I thought you did. But then, you clarified your priorities." She looked at Bianca. Bianca shrank back, her gold dress suddenly looking cheap and gaudy next to the royal velvet. "And Miss Dupont," Isla said, nodding slightly. "I see you are wearing the Season's Gold collection. A bold choice. I believe my lady-in-waiting has the same dress in blue." A ripple of snickering went through the crowd behind them. Bianca turned beet red. "Listen, Isla," Harrison said, stepping forward, his ambition overriding his fear. "This is a lot to process, but we can talk about this, privately. I still care about you. The divorce, it was a mistake. I was under pressure. We can fix this." The audacity of the statement made the king step forward, his hand twitching toward his sword, but Isla held up a hand to stop him. "Fix this?" Isla laughed, a light, airy sound that echoed in the silent ballroom. "Harrison, you divorced a wife because you thought she was poor. You don't get to reclaim a princess because you found out she is rich." "I am building the skyline of this city," Harrison pleaded, his voice rising, desperate to prove his worth. "I can help your country. I have designs. My country," Isla interrupted, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel, "has stood for 1,000 years. We have cathedrals older than your entire bloodline. We do not need your glass boxes, Harrison, and we certainly do not do business with men who betray their vows for a better deal." She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You wanted a power player, Harrison. You wanted someone who commands the room. Well, here I am. Are you proud?" Harrison stared at her, stripped of his ego, stripped of his defenses. He saw the woman he had thrown away, and he saw the mountain he could never climb. He whispered. "I made a mistake." "Yes," Isla said, stepping back and taking her brother's arm. "You did. And the tragedy is, Harrison, I would have given you the world. All you had to do was be a decent man." She turned her back on him. "Enjoy the hors d'oeuvres, Mr. Sterling. I hear they are excellent, unlike your judgment." The silence that followed Princess Isolde's departure was heavy, pressing against Harrison's eardrums like deep water. For a heartbeat, the grand ballroom was frozen in shock. Then, the dam broke. It didn't start with shouting. It started with a whisper, a collective, sibilant hiss that swept through the room like a brush fire. Harrison could feel the eyes of the city's elite boring into him. These were the people he had spent 5 years trying to impress, the investors he had courted, the rivals he had mocked. Now they weren't looking at him with envy. They were looking at him with a mixture of amusement and disgust, as if he were a court jester who had forgotten his place. Harrison stood rooted to the floor, his mind a chaotic storm of denial. "It's a prank," his brain insisted. "Isla is quiet. Isla is simple. She cannot be Her Royal Highness." But the evidence was searing. He watched the back of her midnight blue velvet gown as she ascended the dais to sit beside the king. The way she moved, that effortless, gliding grace, wasn't learned in 3 weeks. It was muscle memory. She had dimmed her own light so he wouldn't feel blinded, and he had punished her for the darkness. "You liar!" a voice hissed beside him, sharp enough to cut glass. Harrison turned slowly. Bianca was trembling. It wasn't fear. It was a rage so pure it distorted her beautiful features. Her face, usually a mask of bored perfection, was flushed a blotchy red. "Bianca, listen," Harrison began. "You absolute fraud," she hissed, loud enough for the nearby French delegation to stare. She jabbed a manicured finger into his chest. "You told me she was a nobody. You told me she was a charity case you picked up in a library. You said she was dead weight." "I didn't know," Harrison pleaded, his hands raised in surrender. "I swear, Bianca, she never told me. She lived like a pauper." "She lived like a pauper because she didn't need to prove anything," Bianca spat, her eyes darting around the room. seeing the smirks on the faces of her rivals. "But you needed to prove everything, and you dragged me into this humiliation." "How was I supposed to know?" Harrison's voice rose to a desperate shout. "She clipped coupons, Bianca. She mended her own socks. Who suspects their wife is a princess when she worries about the price of milk? A man who actually pays attention to his wife might have noticed," Bianca screamed. The veneer of civilization was gone. "My father is standing right over there. He's talking to the senator. And do you know what they are looking at? They are looking at us. They are looking at the fools who insulted the guest of honor." "I can fix this," Harrison stammered, sweating profusely. "I'll go up there. I'll demand a private audience. We were married. I have rights." "Excuse me, sir." The voice was low, baritone, and brooked no argument. Harrison spun around. Standing behind him was the head of security, a man with a scar running down his jawline and an earpiece buzzing with orders. Behind him stood 2 more guards, radiating a threat of violence. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Dupont," the guard said, his face devoid of emotion. "The king has requested that your presence is no longer required." Harrison gaped at him, his ego flaring up one last time. "What? You can't kick me out. Do you know who I am? I am Harrison Sterling. I designed the skyline of this district." "The invitation has been rescinded," the guard said, stepping into Harrison's personal space. "You are causing a disturbance, and you have insulted Her Highness. You will leave immediately." "I'm not leaving until I speak to her," Harrison shouted, trying to shove past the guard toward the dais where Isla sat, looking serene and untouchable. "Isla! Isla! Tell them to stop!" The reaction was instantaneous. The guard grabbed Harrison's arm in a vice-like grip, twisting it behind his back with a practiced efficiency that sent a bolt of white-hot pain shooting up his shoulder. Harrison yelped, his knees buckling. "Let go of me!" "Move!" the guard growled. It was the longest walk of Harrison's life. They weren't escorted out through the grand doors. They were marched through the center of the ballroom, paraded past the guests like captured criminals. Harrison saw faces he knew. There was Carter Bennett, his architectural rival, holding a glass of scotch. Carter didn't look away. He locked eyes with Harrison and raised his glass in a mock toast, a smirk of pure schadenfreude playing on his lips. Harrison saw the terrifying realization in Carter's eyes. Sterling is finished. His contracts are mine. They were shoved through a service door, past stunned waiters, down a concrete hallway that smelled of stale grease. Finally, a heavy steel door was kicked open. "Out!" the guard said. Harrison and Bianca stumbled out into the night. They weren't on the red carpet. They were in the loading dock alleyway behind the hotel. The weather had turned. A cold, relentless rain hammered down, instantly soaking Harrison's custom tuxedo. Bianca shrieked as her heels skidded on the wet pavement, and she tripped, tearing the hem of her gold-sequined gown on a jagged piece of metal jutting from a dumpster. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind them with a final metallic thud. Harrison leaned against the wet brick wall, gasping for breath, clutching his throbbing shoulder. He looked down at his shoes, worth $1,000, now submerged in a puddle of muddy water. He looked at Bianca. She was a wreck. Her hair was plastered to her skull, and her mascara ran in black streaks down her cheeks. But the look in her eyes wasn't sadness, it was calculation. "This is your fault," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "You destroyed me." "Bianca, stop," Harrison groaned. "I'm the victim here. She lied to me." "She didn't lie," Bianca screamed. "She omitted, because she knew you were a shallow, grasping climber, and you proved her right. My father just texted me. The King of Ethelgard is the primary investor in the new municipal bond. The mayor is having dinner with him next week." Harrison froze. So? So, Bianca stepped closer. Do you think the mayor is going to sign a permit for Sterling Horizons when the CEO is the man who publicly humiliated the king's sister? You're radioactive, Harrison. No bank will touch you. You are done. They can't do that, Harrison whispered, horror sinking in. I'm the best architect in the city. You were, Bianca corrected coldly. Now, you're a liability. A pair of headlights swept into the alleyway. It was Bianca's private driver. She walked toward the car, not waiting for him. Bianca! Harrison splashed through the mud. Where are you going? We need to strategize. We're partners. Bianca stopped, hand on the door handle. In the harsh glare of the headlights, Harrison looked pathetic, wet, shivering, defeated. We were partners when you were an asset, Bianca said, her voice devoid of affection. Now you are a deficit, and my father taught me one rule. Cut your losses early. You can't leave me here, Harrison pleaded, his voice breaking. I divorced her for you. I gave up everything for you. No, Harrison, Bianca sneered, sliding into the dry interior. You divorced her for the money you thought I had, and you lost both. She slammed the door. The car sped away, splashing mud onto Harrison's trousers, its taillights disappearing into the gloom. Harrison was alone. He stood in the center of the alley, the rain chilling him to the bone. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out his phone. He didn't call his lawyer. He opened his photo gallery. He scrolled back to a photo from 3 years ago. It was a candid shot of Isla, sitting on the floor of their old apartment, wearing oversized pajamas and messy socks, eating cheap pizza. She was laughing, her eyes crinkled with genuine joy. She looked happy. She looked real. She looked like home. Harrison stared at the image, raindrops distorting her face. He remembered thinking how lucky he was that she didn't care about money. He remembered promising her a castle. He looked up at the towering backside of the Pierre Hotel. High above, he could see the golden glow of the ballroom windows and hear the faint strains of a waltz. She was up there, in her castle, and he was down here, in the mud. I didn't know, Harrison whispered to the empty alley, his voice hoarse. I just didn't know. But the wind howled back the truth. You didn't want to know. Harrison Sterling walked over to a stack of wooden crates next to the dumpsters. He sat down, put his head in his hands, and for the first time since he was a child, he let out a sob that tore through his chest, a sound of utter ruin echoing in the dark. The morning after the ball, the sun rose over the city with a blinding, cheerful intensity that felt like a personal insult to Harrison Sterling. He woke up in a cheap motel room near the airport, having been unable to face the empty mansion and unable to get back in, realizing his keys were in the jacket Bianca had driven off with. He turned on his phone. It vibrated so violently in his hand it almost fell. 142. Missed calls, 300+ emails. Trending topic. The architect who lost the crown Harrison's stomach dropped. He opened his newsfeed. The headline of the City Gazette was brutal. Royal flush, Sterling Horizons. CEO dumped by princess, abandoned by fiancé in night of high drama. There were photos of him looking arrogant at the entrance, photos of Isla looking majestic on the stairs, and the kill shot, a grainy paparazzi photo taken from the alleyway, showing Harrison sitting on a crate next to a dumpster, covered in mud, looking utterly defeated. He drove to his office. He had to save the firm. If he could just talk to the board, explain that this was a personal misunderstanding. When he arrived at Sterling Horizons, the security guard, a man Harrison had never bothered to learn the name of, stopped him at the turnstile. ID, please, the guard said, his face impassive. It's me, Harrison, he snapped. I own the building. Let me in." "Your access has been suspended, Mr. Sterling," the guard said. "Board of Directors order, effective 8 a.m. this morning." "Suspended!" Harrison screamed, slamming his hand on the desk. "I am the board." "Not anymore," a voice said from the elevator bank. It was Tobias DuPont, Bianca's father. The steel tycoon looked at Harrison with cold, reptilian eyes. "Tobias," Harrison gasped. "Thank God. Look, last night was a mess, but the contract, the tower—" "There is no tower, Harrison," Tobias said, checking his manicure. "The investors pulled out at 6 a.m. No one wants to put money into a project led by a man who publicly humiliated the sister of King Edward. The risk of diplomatic fallout is too high. Permits are being revoked. The city is distancing itself. But our partnership?" "Bianca tells me you defrauded her," Tobias said smoothly. "Led her to believe you were a man of judgment. Clearly you are not. You traded a diamond for a piece of glass, Harrison. That shows a lack of valuation skills. I can't have that in my portfolio." Tobias signaled to the security guards. "Escort Mr. Sterling out. If he returns, call the police." Harrison was led out of his own glass castle. He stood on the sidewalk, holding a box of his personal effects, a stapler, a photo frame, and a stress ball. The empire he had sacrificed his marriage for had dissolved in less than 12 hours. 6 months later, the winter in the city was harsh that year. The wind whipped through the streets, biting through thin coats. Harrison sat in a small, cramped cubicle in a basement office of Rapid Drafts and Permits, a low-level firm that handled garage extensions and fence permits. It was the only place that would hire him. The name Sterling had become poison in the high-end architectural world. He was thinner now. The expensive suits were sold to pay legal fees. He wore a generic grey shirt that was slightly wrinkled. He lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat. "Hey, Sterling!" His manager, a 20-year-old kid named Kyle, shouted from across the room. "Stop daydreaming. The client wants the revisions on the septic tank diagram by noon." "I'm on it," Harrison mumbled, staring at the screen. A septic tank. He used to design skylines. Now he designed waste disposal for suburban backyards. It was lunch break. Harrison took his sandwich, homemade, soggy, and walked to the break room. The TV was on in the corner, usually tuned to sports. Today, it was on the global news. And now we go live to Ethelgard, where the Royal Jubilee is concluding with a historic speech from Her Royal Highness, Princess Isolde. Harrison froze. He hadn't seen her face in months. He had tried to reach out, sending letters, emails, even flowers. They were all returned, unopened, with a polite note from the royal consulate requesting he cease harassment. On the screen, Isla stood on a balcony overlooking a massive crowd of cheering citizens. She looked radiant. She wore a simple white dress, her hair blowing in the wind. She didn't look like the poor wife he had pitied. She looked like a woman who held the world in her hands. She began to speak. Her voice was clear, strong, and filled with a warmth he remembered but had never appreciated. "We build our future not on stone and steel," Isla said. And Harrison felt a ghost of a memory, him lecturing her about steel beams. "We build it on integrity, on loyalty, on the understanding that true worth is not found in what we own, but in who we are when everything is stripped away. We must value the quiet hearts, the unseen hands, the people who love us when we have nothing." The camera zoomed in on her face. For a split second, Harrison imagined she was looking through the lens, across the ocean, straight into his dingy break room. "I learned this lesson the hard way," Isla continued, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "But I am grateful for the freedom it brought me. To those searching for power, be careful. You may find that in your hunger for a throne, you lose the only person who treated you like a king. The crowd erupted in cheers. King Edward stepped out and hugged his sister. Harrison stared at the screen until the segment ended and cut to a commercial for detergent. The silence in the break room was deafening. "Man," Kyle said, biting into an apple. "She's classy. Who was the idiot who divorced her anyway? I heard he's living in a gutter somewhere." Harrison looked down at his sandwich. His hands were trembling. "Yeah," Harrison whispered, his voice cracking. "He was an idiot." He stood up, threw his uneaten lunch in the trash, and walked back to his cubicle. He sat down and opened the file for the septic tank. He looked at the drawing. It was ugly. It was functional. It was exactly what he deserved. Harrison Sterling had wanted a life of luxury and drama. He had wanted to be the main character, and he had gotten his wish. He was the main character of a tragedy, the man who held the moon in his hands and dropped it because he wanted to catch a falling star. He picked up his pen and began to draw, while thousands of miles away, the wife he called Poor put on a crown of gold and ruled a kingdom he would never see again. The story of Harrison Sterling serves as a brutal reminder that the grass is not always greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just painted artificial turf. Harrison spent his life chasing the illusion of power, failing to realize that the greatest power of all, unconditional love and loyalty, was sitting right across the dinner table from him. He judged Isla by her cover, assuming that her simplicity meant she lacked value, only to discover too late that she was the masterpiece he had been searching for all along. In the end, karma didn't need to be aggressive. It simply let Harrison have exactly what he asked for, leaving him to realize that when you trade a genuine soul for social status, you end up with neither. And that is the story of how one man's ambition cost him a literal kingdom. What do you think? Did Harrison deserve his fate, or was the punishment too harsh? And what would you do if you found out your partner was secretly royalty? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and royal twists, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post brand new drama every single day. Thanks for listening. And remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. See you in the next video. 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 You in the next.
But now there's factions of people go, oh no, we got it. We don't like it. We've changed our mind. It wasn't going well for us. We don't like free speech anymore. People who want free speech, they only want free speech so they can go around saying awful things, which just isn't true. And even if it was, the good thing about free speech is people can say awful things back. It's a really good system, right? And you can't say anything under the laws of free speech. That's a total misconception. There are loads of caveats to free speech, all of which I agree with, actually. You can't incite violence. Good rule. You can't slander people. Good rule. You can't libel people, you know? Fascinating fact about libel law. You can't libel the dead. So I could stand here and say, Gandhi used to take it up the arse. If I wanted. Which I do. But free speech is the most important human right there is. It's the right from which all other rights come. Without free speech, you couldn't have human rights, you know, and we've got free speech, in theory, in this country, for a little while longer. We can criticise the government, we can criticise the police, but we should give props to a country that allows us to do that, because we're the envy of some countries. In some countries, you Criticise the police, you get beaten up, or worse. You criticise the government, you can be thrown in jail for life, you know. So they flee their oppression, quite rightly. You know, so would you. They flee their oppression, and they come here, they go, we want to come to England. We go, why? They go, free speech. We go, come on in, welcome. What are you going to do now? We're going to go on a march. What are you going to say? How shit England is. Cheers. Thank you. Thank you. That is their right. Have a great show. And I left. And as I was leaving, I saw one of the other lawyers lean in and show this head lawyer his iPhone, and the head lawyer went, oh, yeah. He went, oh, sorry, Ricky, can you come back a minute? Right, so I'm there. I went, yeah. So he had the phone there. They'd looked up the word minge. I thought I'd gotten away with it, right? So it's now like I'm getting told off. And the head lawyer said, now it says here that the word minge is a derogatory term for female genitalia. I went, well, yeah, it's a slang word for vagina in England. You don't even use it here, do you? He went, no, we don't, but we go out around the world, and with due diligence, now we know it's derogatory, we'll have to bleep that word live. I went, don't bleep the word, like, because people at home won't know what I've said. It'll ruin the... I said, it's literally the punchline. He said, if it's derogatory, I have to... I said, well, what word could I use that you wouldn't bleep? And he went, well, you could say vagina. I went, I'm not saying vagina, right? Nothing funny about it. It's so clinical. I was thinking, Judy Dench at home going, why is he talking about my actual vagina, right? I said, minge isn't like that. It's like, it's not so specific, because vagina's so... Where's your vagina? There, right? Where's your minge? There. It's like... Then one of the younger lawyers went, what about box? I went, I'm not fucking saying box, mate, right? So much for looking at your own box. Right? I said, minge is perfect. I said, people won't know what... If they're American, they won't know what... I said, it's not offensive. It's like... I said, kids use the word in England. Right? They weren't having it. So I said, what about flange? Right? So they looked up the word flange, right? And he went, well, that'd just be confusing, because in America, a flange is a part of a sink unit. I went, oh, well, I said, please let me say minge and don't bleep it. I was really rooting for minge. Right? It was like 12 Angry Men. I go, no one's leaving till I can say minge. Right? And after about 10 minutes, I wore them down. Whatever, said, oh, that won't work. So I was going, please. I said, I'll write them. You won't get any complaints and all this sort of... And eventually, the head lawyer went, OK, you can say minge. I went, and you won't bleep it? He went, no, we won't bleep it. I went, you promise? He went, yes. And I left. I knew they would. And they fucking did, right? So, when I said minge, I pointed. Oh, why do you like London so much, Rick? Because you get a round of applause for not shitting yourself. Right. But that's the next phase now. I reckon it's the next 10 years that I will. But as of now, my arsehole has never let me down. Very underrated, the human arsehole. Everyone goes, oh, the human brain, the greatest computer known to man. All the human liver can regenerate itself. Your arsehole is working 24/7. Even when you're asleep, it's like that. You're not coming out. You're not coming out. You're not coming out. Nope. You're not coming out. And you're not coming in. Because it's like a sewer in there, isn't it? But you've got a lovely little manhole cover. Think of that in real life. Walking along a pavement, it's lovely pavement. If that burst, and you know what's in a sewer, don't you? Piss and shit and cum and dead goldfish and fetuses. In China, just the girl ones. Relax. I'm at that age now as well, because I'm in entertainment. People say, oh, you can have a facelift. I go, no. Have you seen facelifts? They're still just that. Like that. You know what I mean? You go to the doctor, and the doctor goes, do you want to look old or Chinese? You know, it's like... Nothing wrong with looking Chinese if you're Chinese. If you're not Chinese, it's a bit weird. It's offensive. Why is that allowed? You're not allowed to black up. It was considered a good thing to swap ideas with other cultures, with other nations, to share things with other races, to assimilate. It was the opposite of racist. Now it's racist. Gwen Stefani got in trouble in her last video because she had her blonde hair in dreadlocks. People go, no, black people invented dreadlocks, you can't have them, you're white, that's racist. Jamie Oliver got in trouble when he put out authentic jerk chicken recipe. People go, no, black people invented that, you can't have it, you're white, that's racist. Now, black people, they use the N-word, don't they? We invented that. That's the one, isn't it? That's the one. Listen, I know white people are the worst. I know that. That's why no one likes a fucking white middle-aged man anymore until we need a boiler fixing. Then it's get the bald bloke round now. Critical race theory, have you heard of that? Being taught in schools now, particularly in trendy areas like LA, right? Just like 5-year-old kids and 6-year-old kids. If you haven't heard it, in a nutshell, critical race theory says that all white people are racist. So that we're born racist and we continue to be racist because we're affording the privilege of a racist society set up by our forefathers, okay? So basically, all white people are racist and there's nothing we can do about it, which is a relief.